I love you, I love you, I love you. I've heard this swirling around and around in my head since I can remember. I, like so many other little girls, have always loved love. I grew up with a dream, a fantasy of marrying a prince. I had my first heartbreak at 4 years old with a boy named Johnny White. I had planned our sacred nuptials in secret when he told me that he was moving away. I wept for days. Growing up, I fell in love with so many different men who could not and would not love me back. When I finally reached my mid-30s, I decided to give up on men altogether. I only wanted God. But the thing is, I didn't know what God looked like, what God felt like, or what God tasted like, but I knew that I wanted God. So it was there, when I least expected it, that I met him. My story is a love story, and it begins at the edge of a lake on a forest floor. There was a prickling of excitement that filled the air. Golden sunlight felt so warm against my skin. In the distance, I could hear the vibration of sound as the music from the festival began. My heart nearly burst out of my chest when I saw him. He was glowing. He wore dusty pink taffeta wrapped into a turban on his head, and he had the greenest eyes that I've ever seen. They sparkled like emerald jewels. He was so good looking. I just had to keep walking. I couldn't even look back. I danced well into the night. And then a voice inside my head whispered at me that I should go to the other side of the forest floor. And I did. And who do you think turned around? The man with the green eyes, and he said, "Aye, aye, aye, I've been looking for you." We danced. There was this intense chemistry between us, and before I knew it, we were kissing. He tasted like sweet lavender. I felt like I'd been kissing him my entire existence. And so when he asked, "Do you want to get out of here?" I didn't even have to think about it. Of course I said yes. He gently took my hand and he led me away from the dance floor, pushed me up against the trunk of a tree, kissing my lips, kissing my neck, and before I knew it, I was undressed. There was so much passion, so much heat, like a ravenous fire, over far too quickly. Afterwards, as I lay with my head on his chest, I could hear his heart beating. He told me that he needed to tell me something. I'm married. My heart dropped like a stone to the bottom of the lake. I waited for him to tell me that he was joking, but he never did. As we bowed our heads in prayer and parted ways, I looked back over my shoulder and he was just stood there, watching me. I vowed never to see him again. But the next day, I could not stop thinking about him. It was like every cell in my body ached for him. I went to the edge of the lake. I was in turmoil. I believe in the holiness of marriage, but I wanted him so badly. And then I started wailing. I was making sounds that I have never heard myself make before. So it was there, in between the tears, that I fell to my knees and I prayed, dear God, if he was telling me the truth, that he's never done this to his wife before, then send him to me before midnight. It was just before the clock struck 11 p.m. The sky black like velvet and red lights flickered between the trees. It was there that our eyes connected once more. He pulled my body so close into his and he whispered in my ear, "This feels like a heart connection." We spent the next 2 days just dancing. Dancing with him was like stepping into heaven. It was a gentle catapult into another dimension. It was as effortless as taking the breath. He told me that I was powerful. He told me that I was a goddess, but I had a voice inside my head screaming at me that he was lying. However, my body opened to him like a blooming lotus flower. And so it was there on our last night together, as we lay wrapped naked in each other's arms, that I told him that I would wait for him. He told me I had to live my life. Hot tears cascaded down the sides of my cheeks. When it came to say goodbye, I couldn't even look at him in the eye. I didn't think I would ever see him again. But just like two magnets, we were pulled back together. He had to see me one last time. Then he started crying. I mean, he was making sounds that I have never heard a man make before. And he held my face so gently in his hands and he said, I love you, I love you, I love you.
They used to call me witchy at the hospital because I often returned from advanced seminars with abstract skills that nevertheless made a significant, measurable improvement in even the most difficult of cases. The truth is, I have always found it difficult not to respond to what people are feeling, even when they cannot tell me with words. I have come to admit that I am sensitive to the space between the worlds. The energy between us is constantly shifting, and the exchanges alter us both. It feels opportune and dangerous. Once, a modern-day inquisitor tried to have me committed, but the mental health ward could not keep me. The space for the things that have not yet been spoken reminds me of a newborn, still trying to figure out how to be in their physical form. Coscio divino della casa di mami, consentir. It is the deep contemplative work of love. Consentir. The root in Spanish means to feel together. Connection. It is the basic building block of humanity. Souls are hungry for nurturing, and my delight in providing this didn't come in complete sentences. It was more like the gushing of undiluted love. Sometimes bottled in a simple gesture, which attracted the attention of many who worked around those tiny cribs in the neonatal intensive care unit. The current resident or new attending physician would often mistake me for the mother. I would smile because I couldn't possibly be the mother to all the babies I was caring for. But inwardly, I wondered at how that joy was fresh when meeting each new being, and how that unintelligible gibberish, which I attribute to my own mother, sprouted spontaneously from my voice, sometimes before I had a chance to check who was around. It was like a welcome to earth greeting. Namaste. The divine in me recognizes the divine in you. But who is the divine? I am that I am is the only name that Source would accept in that biblical tale. I've taken that very literally. Spirit in you as in me. One of the nurses, who was always validating her intricate knowledge of facts, figures, titration. You see, medicine is a very delicate matter in this setting. Death or serious injury will follow if there's a minute mistake in the dosage. She was always competently attired, perfectly gowned in protective barriers for germs that can live forever and kill a newborn, live in unsuspecting surfaces. This day, her brilliance shone very pointedly from her eyes as she approached me to say, "Why do you continue to follow this case? According to the latest, most advanced information, there's absolutely no potential here." I was glad the mother wasn't there to hear that she would not understand the language in where those words were shaped. But the feeling, I wondered. I also wondered if the babies newly contained in their bodies were sensitive or discouraged by any of this, which is the reason why I advertised as loud as I could to them with my loud, unwavering intention. You are freshly birthed from the goddess. Don't you let anyone else define who you came here to be. My answer to that sharp nurse was quiet as I modulated my voice very carefully inside the nurseries. As long as I can facilitate improvement, I will continue. Theo is the Greek name for God. In my 20 years of clinical experience, I had learned to set aside the facts about a medical condition and take my cues from the human in front of me, in this case, Theo. My expertise as an occupational therapist also helped me discern the nuances in behavior and responses that others did not pick up. I also witnessed the unexplainable. Why some clinical tests correlated with outcomes and others did not. And those mysterious elements that made an inexplicable difference on whether a baby thrived. In Theo's case, the mother and I were instant allies. Every time I noticed an avenue in which her baby could take more control of his body and move functionally, feed safely, or orient to the world so that he could learn from it, I would teach her. I see that Theo has a tendency to really stiffen his legs. If we swaddle him like this, notice how his whole body relaxes? If you support him gently under his chin, he's gonna make a nice seal on that nipple and suck more effectively. Yes, he shows no signs of aspiration. Maybe we can avoid a feeding tube. Oh, how sweet. He's looking at you, Daddy. This is how he learns from the world. You are showing him. If you cradle him and move him gently like this, he will follow your face. And then they will follow wherever you lead them. I did not have to say that part out loud. The love in this family was palpable. I lost track of Theo after the family got discharged from the hospital, but I see him sometimes in Facebook. One time he's wearing Mickey's bow tie at Disney. They're always on a family adventure somewhere. Theo is often featured on the dance floor. Theo, I am that I am. We are the stuff of miracles.
I come from a long line of women who raise their daughters with sand between their toes. My native grandmothers were baptized and buried in the missions before California was even born. My earliest memories are giggling with my teenage sister in the golden sunlight. And although we raced against a rising tide, I felt a sense of belonging so deep that everything in my presence became enchanted. But I was powerless against the chaos that set in my bones as my family and home was destroyed by drug addiction. My parents were always gone. My siblings moved away one by one. And then the furniture walked out on me too. I would pace back and forth around an empty house for hours and days, always alone and always afraid. With each car that passed the house, my hope would rise and fall, then wax and wane. Sometimes I would gather any scraps of food that I could find, and I would sit on the dining room floor with my many offering plates, and I would beg God to save me by sending someone to join me for dinner. So when the power blacked out and the water ran cold, my heart turned to ice. I was 11 years old and homeless when I met a man. And as we walked down the dark, dark street, he explained to me how he'd keep me safe by walking on the edge of the sidewalk near the cars. When I talked, he listened. When I cried, he cared. When he offered me food and a place to sleep, I said yes. And when I awoke to him touching me in the middle of the night, I didn't know how to say no. When he took me fully, I eclipsed into stone. After that, 40-year-old Donald Hurley and I traveled across the country until we made a home underneath the Hale-Bopp Comet in Monteagle, Tennessee. In the daylight, we told people he was my father, but underneath the covers of many night skies, he had become the king of my heart. But one day, I did something wrong, and he approached me with his fist clenched in a rage. And as he towered over me, I sat paralyzed. And as each alternating hand made contact with my face, my head rang until my teeth shattered. There were times I tried to get away, but like a foolish dog returning to its vomit, I always came back. Oh, sure, I had no home to return to, but it was more than that. You see, I desire a man to take control. I like to be told what to do. I wanted him to take care of me, and so he did. Until my sister made a missing persons report that coincided with an investigation about why I was not attending school, and in an instant, I was on a plane back to California to live with my aunt. I had been gone for 3 years, and nobody even dared to ask me where I had been or what had happened. My sister says that they did not ask because I did not speak. I started high school as the mysterious new girl in town. But I was haunted by a crushing secret. And each year that passed, this secret grew darker and deeper. It'd follow me around, tapping on my shoulder, whispering in my ear. It took me 25 years to make a police report, just for the investigator to tell me that Donnie had been dead for years. When I read his obituary, it said that he was a cook. What his obituary did not say was that he was a pedophile. And once upon a time, when I had nothing and no one, he was my savior. I am still fighting for my happily ever after. I am making peace with the way that I still thrash against the darkness of impenetrable shame and fear. But in my thrashing, I realized something. I realized that the secret has never been what happened to me. The secret is not that I was raped or beaten or kidnapped. The secret has always been who I became in spite of it. The secret is that through faith and grace alone, I did not simply crystallize into just some ordinary gem. I had awakened into the Queen of Diamonds.
This story is alive, and it began when I found my sister's lifeless body on the bathroom floor. I was 12, and she was 14. We weren't very close, but I loved her. She was passionate, creative, and she would hold me in her bed when our parents fought. The day I found her on the bathroom floor, I had just come home from soccer practice, sweaty and in need of a shower. "Dinner's ready," My dad called from the kitchen. Can you get your sister? Oh, great. No shower before dinner. I walked to the bathroom and knocked on the door. It's time for dinner. No response. I opened the door and saw her lying on her back, eyes closed, bare feet on the shower mat. What a stupid place to take a nap. I closed the door and walked away. Did you get your sister? My dad called. Oh, okay, I tried, but I'll go try again. I walked back to the bathroom and opened the door. Get up, it's time for dinner. I knelt and shook her shoulders. Emily, wake up, it's dinner time. It was in this moment I realized that the way her feet splayed out was strange. It smelled of alcohol and the silence was too loud. Only pieces of memory follow. My dad rushing in and carrying her flopping body to the car. Sitting in the back seat with her heavy head in my lap. And seeing my dad's tears in the rearview mirror. She was placed on a stretcher when we arrived at the ER and whisked through a set of double doors. The doctors pulled the alcohol and Vicodin from her blood, and Emily survived. She stayed at the hospital for 2 weeks. She was sick, my parents told the school. Life went on, and my sister's suicide attempt was buried in silence. That's when she showed up. The first time I saw her, she was staring at me through my bedroom window. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent, and her black hair whipped in the wind. The next time I saw her, she was in my room. My name is Athira. She came to me often. She was there when I got home from school, and she tucked me into bed each night. She crossed over to visit me in my dreams, too. I could sense her there as I took in flashes of death. She was strange, but I didn't mind her so much. When she moved in full-time, I cleared a drawer for her in my dresser. I watched curiously as she opened her carpet bag and pulled out an hourglass, a bundle of rosemary, and a black leather-bound book. When she had finished unpacking, she sat back on my bed and put her feet up. You know, if you hadn't gone back to check on your sister again that day, she would have died, and it would be your fault. I know. I didn't cry at first, but over time, the tears came in hidden moments, especially at night. I cried so many tears that an orb began to form around me, a thin layer that grew until I was submerged in a teardrop that extended 5 feet in every direction. Over time, it only grew bigger. I left for college, and Athira followed. One night, I was at a party, and I caught a strong whiff of alcohol. I was transported back to the bathroom of my childhood. Athira came close. If you do not pay very close attention, somebody in this room is going to die. Her words felt like a punch in my stomach, and I lost my breath. My teardrop shook with panic, and I ran out of the room. I learned it was best to avoid parties or bars. Athira felt pleased that she could keep me safe. The path behind me distorted with time. One day, Athira plunged into my teardrop. Nobody in your family has ever mentioned it. Are you certain that any of that really happened. Athira, I know what I saw. Over a decade passed, and I found myself in the Bay Area taking a walk with my sister on the streets of our childhood. We had never discussed what had happened 12 years ago. We walked into the open space, and I felt just a hint of warmth as the sun glimmered through my teardrop. We walked up a hill, and I saw Athira standing at the top, arms pulled sternly behind her back. Wrinkles had formed around her intense eyes, and gray strands streaked her jet black hair. We came to a bench, and we sat. I needed to say something. Sensing my thoughts, Athira lunged towards me, eyes wide with fear. She wrapped her hands tightly around my throat. No, Athira, no more. I pried her hands from my neck and pushed her away from me. She staggered back and fell to the ground, stunned. My teardrop shook. I turned to my sister and I said, I want to talk about the time I found you on the bathroom floor. As the words came out of my mouth, my sorrowful teardrop burst and crashed down around us, leaving enormous puddles in the grass. I'm so sorry, my sister said. We wept, and she held me close. I could hear Emily's heart beating, and I could feel the warmth of the sun on my skin. My heart exhaled. I felt Athira kiss each of my feet, the left one and then the right. When I opened my eyes, she was nowhere to be seen. Athira never showed up uninvited again after that day, but sometimes, when I look closely at the puddles after it rains, I find Athira looking up at me. I catch her loving gaze, and I smile.
It was around 1973, about 51 years ago. I was 23 years old, college dropout, divorced, and the mother of a young son. I had worked as a dental assistant for 4 or 5 years, trained on the job with a starting pay of $1.60 an hour. I needed more help financially because I got zero child support, even with a court order for $125 a month. My son's dad had returned from Vietnam, thankfully, but as with too many other vets from Vietnam, he was traumatized and addicted to heroin. He could barely take care of himself, let alone a wife and family, kid. And there was no way I was going to raise him in that environment. But that meant I was on my own. I was the breadwinner. I was supplementing my income with food stamps and Medi-Cal, but I didn't feel comfortable with that. I felt guilty asking for government assistance. I didn't feel poor, but in reality I was. I didn't feel desperate, but I qualified and took the help. My family supported me with childcare, and my parents let us live in a small travel trailer on their property until I could find something more permanent. I got lucky and was able to rent a 3-bedroom, bath and a half house on 4 acres in one of the last orchards in San Jose. I eventually got housemates. Most were friends or friends of friends. But that I still needed to earn more money. Transportation, utilities, and clothing all added up. And when I felt it every time I went to the grocery store. Since I was living with my friends, I got into some partying and my dental office job got boring. So I applied for a waitress job in a town nearby at a restaurant/club where I would serve dinner entrees, such as steak and lobster meals, until the kitchen closed at 9:30, and then the band would take the stage in the middle of the restaurant. And that's when the party started. The liquor was flowing, and I made more tips and more fun. So I was a bored single mom and wanted to explore with more people since I'd left my marriage unsatisfied. And it was the era of free love. And I had childcare, and I knew my son was safe. A friend had been observing my new lifestyle and made the suggestion that if I'm going to go out and have sex with guys, why don't you get paid? And I was shocked, but he was serious, and I got curious. Would I be able to have a business of my own and make more money and still retain control of my body? He knew somebody, he had a connection, and could help with that. So he took me to meet Lee. I never knew her real name. She was a tall, poised woman, attractive, but presented with class. She was well-dressed and wore understated makeup. She had an air about her that said she was in control, friendly but professional. Her apartment was beautiful and spacious, with expansive views of the city and beyond. And it was hers. She was a successful businesswoman. It was pretty impressive. We chatted and she agreed to take me on to see if I would fit in. The customers sometimes like a new girl for added variety. Lee took me through the rules and protocols. No one was allowed to do or say anything that wasn't courteous and respectful. She didn't have clients that were anything but polite. After the man and I were introduced, the next activity was to wash his cock, and check for disease or infection. After that, we would slip into the bedroom and discuss his desires, and then do the thing. While I was making sure he got what he desired, his orgasm, I still hadn't explored my sexuality. I wasn't gaining any knowledge of my pleasure, or for what I wanted, or how to ask for it. All this was going on during the second wave of feminism in the US. women were protesting, rallying, and marching for equality and for the freedom to earn money the way they wanted to. They were all over the country. They were sharing stories of taboo subjects. And when I would share that I had recently become a sex worker, I was met with positive responses such as cool or wow. I didn't work there very long. I didn't find it very fulfilling. While doing that work, I was looking for good sex. I thought that doing it often, having multiple partners, like practice makes perfect, right? I would find that. But how could anybody else know my body when I didn't? I still wanted to get to know my yoni, to learn about the sensations I could feel in the different parts, and to share that with a trusted partner. So I took that confusion and frustration into my 2 marriages. One was divorced and one widowed. I did get to know my body and to pleasure myself. And I thought that that was it. I didn't even need a partner. And I was too old anyway. And then I met a man who opened his heart to me. I feel seen and heard and safe with him. And we have trust and communication, all qualities that have helped me to open completely to my sexuality. I'm here to say, it's never too late.
The first time I saw them doing it, he just mounted her from behind and started thumping wildly. And then he fell off in a kind of death nap. I thought I'd killed him. Even though I grew up on a small farm in Northern California, we had all kinds of animals. Even my teacher didn't explain to me that males come. And so when I was breeding my rabbits at age 10, I was so confused. Even when one of my rogue rabbits escaped and was humping one of our chickens, my parents told me that's where the Easter Bunny comes from. I did learn that you could hump outside of your species, but I didn't really know what sex was all about. And I really wished someone had explained it to me. But the truth is, I learned more about sex from animals than I did from adults. It wasn't until my first biology class where my teacher, who had such a wild spirit, would tell us these short stories about animal sex to keep us awake. It worked for me. I remember the story he told us about banana slugs and how they're both male and female. This is so interesting. You could be male and female? It's true. Male banana slugs have a corkscrew penis and a hole in the back of their head, which is their vagina. And when those slow, slimy creatures make it across the forest floor, Creator wanted to make sure they could do it. The only problem is, because of the corkscrew nature of his penis, it can get stuck. And the only way to get out is for one of them to reach back and bite it off. And then he becomes a she and she becomes a he forevermore. kind of explains my high school experience. But what the truth was, I was crazy about learning about sex, and it felt like a small perversion to learn it about from animals. But then in college, I found my girlfriend's book that she kept in the bathroom, and it was titled Animal Sex. And it was organized into monogamy, polyamory, group sex, incest, and rape. It turns out in the animal kingdom, there are very few rules. And when I look back, I should have read the chapter on polyamory much closer because I live in California, but I was more interested in the monogamous creatures, the ones who had a sense of loyalty towards one another. You see, geese, for example, they mate for life. And if one of the pair dies, the one that's left will go into a kind of mourning that can attract the attention of another mating pair. And that mating pair will adopt the widower, and they'll become an active threesome. Even in the scaly, cold reptilian world, snakes look after each other. If one of the mates is sick or dying, that scaly snake will wrap its body around its mate and try and keep it warm even days after it's dead. All of these stories fascinated me. Was the whole world fucking all the time? And then I was hired to teach at an elementary school where I was in charge of teaching the kindergartners about science. And we spent one day, all day outside in the wild, and we saw all kinds of things. I remember one time we were at the edge of a riverbed, and in the water there was a ball of slimy salamanders undulating with their eyes slit in ecstasy. We sat there watching in awe. I'm so glad my students didn't ask me what was happening because I did not know how to explain a salamander orgy. But then my time ran out. We went on a field trip up to Ano Nuevo to see the elephant seals. And there we were again, right at the edge of the sea, on the sand, watching a ginormous elephant seal, a big bull, bulldozing across, trying to get to his mate, crushing baby seals. When one of my students, Simon, with his big blue eyes, he just looked up at me and said, "What is happening?" I wished I had the right words to explain to him that fucking and fighting sometimes come together. I wished his parents had told him where he had come from, and maybe some of this would have made sense, and maybe it wouldn't have. I was scrambling for the right vocabulary. I couldn't say fucking. I couldn't say, maybe I could say breeding or seeding or coupling or copulating or rutting and penetrating, spawning, inseminating, pollinating, populating. All of these words swam in my head, and in my confusion, I just pulled my kindergartners back from the seashore. We wandered back to the bus in a kind of confusion about nature. How was I supposed to go back to the classroom and inspire their imagination to save the world, to save their part of the green world, maybe their backyard or an estuary somewhere, when what they were witnessing was not just fucking and fighting, but fucking and fighting that turned to warring, and warring that destroyed forests and estuaries and meadows and streams. I did my best to inspire myself. Stayed away from the news about forests being destroyed, and would wander out in the wild alone when I wasn't in the classroom. I'd wander up creek beds, rock hopping, looking for creatures mating in the water. I would climb up trees looking for birds' nests, and I'd lay in meadows, half naked, listening to the seeds pop and pollinate. I was looking for what was right in the world and how creation herself was reinventing herself every day and everywhere. It felt like my own private perversion, and some things I just couldn't share with my kindergarten students. But it didn't stop my curiosity. One day I was hiking up in the Sierras. It was summertime. And up there, the sugar pines, they were emanating a smell, a pungent, erotic smell that made my skin feel electric and something inside of me soften. I started smelling it in other forests, and I would ask my friends, do you smell that? That kind of sweet, pungent smell in the air? Many of them just kind of rolled up their noses. They didn't name what I wanted named until the day I was hiking with a friend of mine who's a scientist, and the smell was so strong. I looked at him and I said, do you smell that? Mm-hmm. What do you think it is? What do you think it is? He said. It smells like sperm. He affirmed my suspicion. He said scientists had taken the sex out of science so they wouldn't turn everyone on. But in truth, trees are some of the oldest beings on the planet. And when they have sex, they open up their spores. They let their tree sperm waft into the air, and the breeze acts like Cupid, moving that tree sperm over to their mates. My imagination was blown. You mean, when I go hiking in the forest, I am walking through a soup of tree sperm, all around me, breathing in the sexing of trees? This is so exciting. While things are dying, things are being reborn all the time. I have never stopped my erotic perversion of discovering how the world is fucking and loving her way back into being. Every moment, I have stopped categorizing the difference between lovemaking of trees or reptiles or insects or mammals. We are all part of this web of life, and I am a sacred part of it too.